Welcome back everyone. This is Will Alexander, General Manager of Property Management at Property Brokers. This is section number 2 of the online version of the RTA Roadshow. Tonight I'm talking to you about the first major of the 3 topics, which is the amendments to the Residential Tenancies Act. So let's just get into it, shall we? Were they needed? Did they need to change the Residential Tenancies Act? On top of everything else that's changing right now, insulation regulations, healthy home standards, all that sort of stuff, did they need to do it? When they change this stuff, they go out to the public, and then the public can come back in the form of submissions to say, put in their 2 cents, what they think, is it needed, all that sort of stuff. They put it out to the public and they got 4,784 submissions back. I'm told that is a really high response rate. 50% were owners, 41% were tenants, 9% were affiliated bodies, Renters United, Investors Federation, that sort of stuff. But a very strong response. But are you surprised? I'm not, because Kiwis love property. All our money is tied up in property. It's the vehicle of choice to invest in New Zealand. So obviously lots of emotion tied in around that, a really good response. Were they needed? Well, have a look at this. Absolutely. The Residential Tenancies Act came out in 1986 and it was for society at the time. It's now 2020 and guess what? Things have changed quite a bit. In several areas of the Residential Tenancies Act, things became outdated. What they have released, these 14 amendments to the Act, in our opinion, are well-rounded and meet the needs of contemporary society. Absolutely things needed to change. You only have to look at what's happening in the marketplace now. Look at these headlines. I didn't try very hard to pull these out of the local papers. Lots of stuff going on both sides of the fence. This isn't just owners, this isn't just tenants, this is on both sides of the fence. And the legislation needed to become more robust to make sure that everyone's needs, tenants, owners, agencies, were met. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys saw that headline where the disgruntled tenant avoids punishment for poisoning the owner. I'll tell you what the story was. It's absolutely crazy. A tenant was living with an owner, which is kind of weird in the first place, and the tenant fell out with the owner, which you can kind of imagine would probably happen. So the tenant decided to put bleach into the owner's shampoo and conditioner bottles. And what do you do when you have a shower? You put on your conditioner, you put on your shampoo. I think it's in that order. And it blinded the owner. Absolutely crazy stuff. It went to the tribunal and it was avoided punishment because the tenant's argument was she thought that the owner would smell the bleach before she put it on her hair. But then on the flip side of that, you've got a tenant that asks the owner, is my property insulated? And then the owner turns around and gives them 90 days notice to leave. Don't want questions, get out of my property. That is absolutely not fair at all. So yes, when you look at the stories, absolutely it was needed. At the moment right now, you've got the perception, you've got the scaremongering, what we've just seen, all the headlines, the sensationalism, all that kind of stuff, stories out of context. Then you've got the bias. So that's the key stakeholders, the tenants, the owners, the tradespeople, the agencies, and they only really see their position. It's emotion, decisions out of emotion, that sort of stuff. And then you've got the truth. And this is what tonight is all about, is putting light on what is going on and breaking down these 14 amendments to remove misconceptions, debunk some of these radical ideas that people have. It's not that bad, but one thing, it is becoming very specialised and you need to know what you're doing. So, let's get into it, shall we? 14 amendments coming out in 3 stages. First stage, August last year. Second stage, February 2021. Third stage, August 2021. So the first 2 have already come into effect. That came into effect in August. The rental increases were delayed because of the COVID rental freeze, so they didn't come into effect until the 26th of September. That's all now in play. You got the bulk of the changes, 10 changes coming out in February, 11th of February 2021, and then the last 2 changes 1 year after royal assent of this change, and that is physical assault and family violence. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. I am going to pick out 6, and I'm going to go into those in detail. The 6 meaty ones, the ones that we've had the most feedback about. But a couple of quick things. Simple stuff. Rental bidding. I mean, that is obvious. No property manager would accept rental bidding because at the end of the day, it's pivotal on getting the right tenant. Getting the right tenant is far better than a little bit more rent. No owner or agency is going to argue with that. So that is absolutely common knowledge. Installing a fibre connection is also very common knowledge, very obvious sort of stuff. The tenant doesn't pay, the owner doesn't pay, the installer pays. There are some things around that, such as how difficult is it to install, but it's pretty straightforward. One thing that almost made it in, and it didn't, and fortunately it didn't, was pets. They were going to say if a tenant has a pet, you could not discriminate and they could get the property. So owners could not say we do not allow pets. That very nearly got in, and it was a little bit scary. But the one thing that did get in was physical assault. And as an agent, a property manager, and as a manager of my team, I was extremely happy to see that. So if someone gets assaulted, my team sees some pretty crazy stuff out there, and I've personally witnessed a lot of scary stuff that happens in this industry. If someone physically assaults the owner, the landlord, the family members, the agent, then you go to the police, you get a police report, and the tenant can be asked to leave within 14 days. That is a good tool. There's some pretty tough stuff out there at the moment. There's the common things that we see all the time, but there's also the financial hardship, which is new since COVID, and that is scary. So let's break it down to the top main 6 areas of the amendments to the Residential Tenancies Act that have raised the most questions with us in property brokers. The first piece that I want to look at tonight is security of tenure. This is a big part of the legislation. When you think about generation rent and the way New Zealand is going, this is all about giving tenants security of tenure. When you read this legislation, those of you that are legal in law will know what I mean when I'm saying legal jargon, lots of it. I mean, you read this stuff from top to bottom, you get to the bottom, you go, well, I'll give that one another go, and you do that about 5 times. Very, very hard to follow, but the best thing that you can do with this stuff, and a lot of these things that are coming in, is you wait for them to go through the tribunal to see how they're interpreted, how this new legal aspect of the RTA is interpreted by the adjudicators. That gives us a precedent, and then we can act on that. So a lot of what's in security of tenure will require for cases to go to the tribunal. We get an understanding of how the adjudicators interpret this law, and then we can go from there. So the first part is 90 days notice. At the moment, if you have a tenant on a periodic tenancy, for whatever the reason things aren't going well, doesn't have to be specific, you can give them 90 days notice to leave the property. You don't have to give a reason. In most instances, it's best not to give a reason. That's what happens. Under this new law, that goes. So if you have a tenant in a periodic tenancy that you're not unhappy with, for whatever the reason, then you cannot give them 90 days notice. If you're an owner and you want to move back into your property, family member or the owner, you now give them 63 days notice to vacate the property, not 42. We always say as well, give yourself a buffer. Don't go 63, go 70, because things happen. Moving trucks are delayed, bad weather, whatever. It's always good to have a buffer. If I am a farmer and I want to rent out my farmhouse to my new farm manager, and it's currently privately rented to a tenant on a periodic tenancy, then you can give them 63 days notice because you're renting the property to an employee. So that's another reason. 90 days. So if I want to put my property on the market and I want the property to be empty so I can do carpet, paint, cosmetic stuff, give it a spruce. You can give the tenant 90 days to move out of the property, but the property has to be put on the market within 90 days of the vacate date. So that's the first one. Second one, if you sell your property with a periodic tenancy in place and the purchasers want vacant possession, when the property goes unconditional, you provide them with 90 days notice to move out of the property. But a key one here is, again, allow for the buffer, because those people that expect the property to be empty on the 90th day, which coincides with settlement, so many times it doesn't happen, guys, and you've got lawyers battling each other at 4 o'clock on a Friday. It just gets messy. Give yourself a buffer so the tenants can move out, you can check the property, clean the property, get the property ready for the new purchasers, and you're good to go. It's a big change though when you look at it, because if I'm a purchaser, I've just purchased my dream property, I want to move into it, and then for someone to turn around and say, well, it's got a tenant in it on a periodic tenancy, we need to give them 90 days notice, 3 months. You know, I can understand that's a tough pill to swallow for some people, but that's the new rules, and that has to become common knowledge. The other one is renovation. So if you're going to be doing an extensive renovation on your property, you can give the tenants 90 days to move out of the property, but the renovations have to start within 90 days of the tenant moving out. Now, what constitutes an extensive renovation, and how long does the renovation have to go on for? Nothing in the legislation says anything about that. Using common sense, there's a couple of things that you'd look at. Firstly, WorkSafe. No contractor wants to get on the wrong side of WorkSafe, and they may very quickly turn around and say, you know what, we've got tools lying around, power cords everywhere, wires coming out of the walls. Do not want people living there right now. They need to move out if you want to do that. First thing, probably taken out of our hands. Second thing is utilities. If there's no hot water, running water, or power, things like that, then no one can live there. It's pretty obvious. And the last one is the security of the property. Big part of the legislation already been in place for a long, long time. If the property can't be secured, then obvious reasons, no one can really live in there. How long does it have to go for? I don't know. But the key message here is, this is not loophole stuff. Don't look at these changes to look for loopholes to get people out of your property, because that is where you're going to come unstuck. This is not what the amendments to the Act is about. As long as your intent is genuine and you can prove that what you're doing is right, then you've got absolutely nothing to worry about. Antisocial behaviour. Now, I talked earlier about something going through courts to get a precedent, and so we can understand how to interpret this one. This is a toughie, and it's captured the imaginations of a lot of media as well. But basically what they're saying is, if you've got a tenant that has acted in an antisocial way 3 times within 90 days, then you can apply to the tribunal to ask for them to move out. But there's lots of things that you have to get right. There's actually 6 things that you have to get right to make sure that you follow due process in accordance with all these amendments to the Act. So the first thing is, you need to describe the behaviour within the letter. The second thing is, you need to say who was involved, who engaged in the antisocial behaviour. Then you've got time, dates, location. And then every correspondence you have to say to the tenant, this is either the first time in 90 days, second time in 90 days, or third time in 90 days that you've engaged in antisocial behaviour. The other one is, they have the right to challenge any of these notices in the tribunal. That has to be in the documentation. And then the final one is, after the 3rd application for antisocial behaviour letter, you have to apply to the tribunal within 28 days. So that's, you know, a catch. And for us at Property Brokers, no problem. We have templated documents within our trust accounting system. Simply update that with the merge fields to pull through the relevant information, no problem whatsoever. But if you don't have those tools, a lot of people are going to get tripped up because of all of that stuff. Next one is an interesting one, and it was in the fine print. But this is about people that are consistently behind in rent arrears. So The legislation says if you are 5 working days in arrears or more, 3 times within 90 days, and you apply to the tribunal within 28 days of the 3rd time, then you can ask them to leave under Section 55. But again, you've got to get everything right in those letters. But that is a piece of legislation that captures a lot of the repeat offenders. Sometimes the rents can blow out significantly by the time you get to the tribunal. That one is good for showing track record of what is actually going on within the property. Another one is hardship. So simple explanation, if I'm a family of 4 coming back from Europe, because COVID is crazy in Europe and New Zealand is the best place to live in the world, we already knew that, but now even more so, then, and I have a tenant renting my property, a single working tenant, so to speak, then it's very easy for me to say, well, look, I've got a family of 4 coming back, very hard to find a family of 4 home in this location, I need to take back my rental property to live in, that kind of stuff. If you can justify that you'll be in greater hardship than the tenant, then it's simple stuff. This is a big one, the next one, ending of a fixed term tenancy. I haven't quite understood how this is going to land in provincial New Zealand yet, but what they're saying is, at the moment, you can sign up a tenant on a 1-year fixed term tenancy, for example. At the end of the 1-year fixed term tenancy, you can decide not to renew it. For whatever the reason, might not be happy with how it's going, all that sort of stuff. You can say, not going to renew the tenancy, and then re-rent it straight away, no problem. That now stops. If there's on a 1-year fixed term tenancy and you want it to end, but the tenant doesn't want it to end, then it's going to default to a periodic tenancy, and then they can stay in there indefinitely. Big change. Big changes in those student markets where you're timing tenancies around the peak seasons, offsetting the downtime. For example, in Auckland, in the student market, we used to go February to February. So that downtime through Christmas, when all the students go back home in November, we would mitigate lost rent through that period by going February to February. In provincial New Zealand, a couple of examples. If I have a rental property, I rent it out for 10 months on a fixed term tenancy for 10 months because I want to move back in there for 2 months over Christmas and summer, then that now goes. So that's a big change. Haven't understood this in provincial New Zealand yet. We need time to understand the implications. But my first thought is, what is the point of a fixed term tenancy now? One of the last ones is 21 days to 28 days. So if a tenant wants to vacate the property, they now have to give 28 days notice to vacate the property. We don't see this as an issue. We see this as more time to find a suitable tenant for the property when we re-rent it. Not too many downsides here, guys. And the final thing is, if you get all that wrong, you get fined $6,500. So good luck. Next one I'm tackling tonight is enforcement measures to be increased. So MB is the regulatory body now, and they're getting beefed up, big infrastructure scale up to monitor and measure this industry. Absolutely support this. This is wonderful. The industry needs to be checked and regulated. So no issues whatsoever here. The MB will be able to take a tenant, a landlord, or an agency to the tribunal if they're getting things wrong, and especially if they're repeat offenders and they can build a track record. Not only can they take us to court, they can also retrospectively take us to court for something that we got wrong in the past. So they could say 10 months ago you rented a property that didn't stipulate, wasn't insulated, for example, 2016 insulation regulations. They could potentially take us to the tribunal for this. Regular audits and assessments are coming into the industry, and they've got 3 new enforcement powers. So you've got infringement notices, enforceable undertakings, and improvement notices. So this is all new powers getting beefed up. MB is probably going to become the regulatory body. I don't know that for sure, but just like RTA regulates the sales industry, MB could very well become the regulatory body for property management. The other day I heard about a tribunal case, and the tribunal case was for a mistake that happened a long time ago, and that property manager is long gone out of the industry. But the adjudicator said, can you please give me the name of the property manager at that time? I have never heard of that. I asked my colleagues around the country from different companies, we all work very closely together, ever heard of that? No one had ever heard of that. You do not want to be on that black book. What they are doing is they are capturing information of tenants, landlords, agencies, property managers that are repeatedly getting it wrong, poor conduct, and they're going to make those people's lives very difficult. If this industry becomes regulated and it looks like it's going to be, and we need to have a license, code of conduct, good character test, they're going to make those people's lives very, very difficult. You don't want to be on the black book. No way. Finally, all fines and fees are increasing by 50 to 80%. So they're taking this stuff pretty seriously. Next one we're looking at tonight is making minor changes. This captured the imagination of quite a few people as well, because the first thing you go is, well, are people going to be knocking out walls and building extensions and all that kind of stuff, and what is going to go on? When you read the legislation, it is not scary. It is minor stuff, and it will be self-regulating. It will sort itself out very, very quickly. But basically, if a tenant asks to do a minor renovation, we have to respond within 21 days. If we don't, we get fined $1,500. We can't unreasonably deny or deny consent. But there is pretty clear roadmap of what minor renovations are. You're talking about, my baby is crawling around, I live in a place that shakes all the time from earthquakes, I want to fix my big heavy bookcase to the wall so it doesn't crush my baby. Obvious stuff. Baby boy, baby girl, whatever, you can tell I'm a father, want to paint pink or blue, whatever. Floating bookshelves, minor stuff. Stuff that can be easily done, you don't need a professional contractor. But the kicker with this legislation is everything that gets done has to be reinstated at the end of the tenancy. If the tenant doesn't get reinstated, they get fined. What this means is you've got to be very careful and clear about determining a baseline. So if they want to do something, they want to put floating bookshelves on a wall, for example, you clearly document the condition of the wall before they do it. So at the end of the tenancy, we can all come back and go, well, there was never bolt holes there in the first place. I can see the shelves are gone, but you've still got big bolt holes. Want those to be plastered over and painted, please. That's all fair and reasonable. So I don't think this stuff is going to be that scary. Obviously, there are caveats such as body corporates. You can't do certain things within body corporates. It's a specialist field. People who manage apartments, that sort of stuff, know all about that. So nothing scary, guys, and I think this will sort itself out in time. Landlords to keep records. Now this one is a tricky one. I read this and I thought, how is someone going to manage properties without all the tools we use? We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on software to help us manage properties professionally and accurately. And this change in the legislation is going to make it very, very tricky for people to manage properties privately. That's my first take. So basically, MB can come in and say, we want to see anything to do with this current tenancy or retrospectively for 12 months, and it has to be provided within 21 days. So that could be stuff around, does the tenancy agreement stipulate certain aspects? All very clear in Section 13A of the Residential Tenancies Act. Healthy home standards, address for service, did it meet insulation regulations at the time? All records and variations to the tenancy agreement. If you've got succession of flatmates moving and moving out, have you recorded that all clearly? Communication, letters, emails, SMS, texts, all remedial work. So for example, you did a gas fitting job 10 months ago, and it's a highly regulated industry for obvious reasons. They could come in and say, was that gas fitter licensed and regulated at the time of placing that work order? You've got to be able to produce those documents. In property brokers, we use a great system called Tuppy, very straightforward. No one works for property brokers unless they've got the relevant license, regulated, and they've got indemnity insurance, all that sort of stuff. Otherwise, they don't work for us. But you've got to be able to prove it. Financial records and transactions, if you've got, you have a property in an area that has water separate to the rent, and there's lots of different line items on the financial statement, you've got to be able to pull that apart very, very clearly. So it's quite a big piece of legislation when you think about the implications. So basically, can ask for anything, has to be produced within 21 days, otherwise you could potentially be up for a fine or a fee. Changes to the jurisdiction of the tribunal. This is pretty scary. I am a private owner with 6 properties, or we're property brokers with thousands of properties. Now it doesn't matter. The owner with 6 properties is considered to be a large owner and is subjected to the full weight of these new laws, just as professional large agencies are. And guess what happens? The tribunal now can hear cases of up to $100,000 in compensation claims by the tenant. It's pretty big stuff. If we get it wrong, and there's lots of repeat offences, all that sort of stuff, and the tribunal is building a track record here, you can get fined on top of that $100,000, you can get fined by the tribunal for up to $50,000 on top of that. And they're targeting 4 sections of the Residential Tenancies Act where if you get this wrong, you're going to get fined, you're going to get whacked with a big, big fine. So you got Section 45, Section 54, Section 60, and Section 137, which will mean absolutely nothing to you guys, but basically what they're saying is you can't rent a property that's in a bad condition, is health and safety issues, healthy homes issues, you can't do retaliatory notice, you can't contract outside of the Act, you can't rent a contaminated property. I mean, who's going to do that anyway? So that's pretty obvious, but what's going to happen is if you can keep getting this wrong, if you're an owner that keeps renting out properties in bad condition, or you're an owner that never addresses maintenance, then you're going to get fined. And it's going to start small, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. This legislation is targeted at the people that purposely contract outside of the Residential Tenancies Act. Landlords or tenants that take advantage of vulnerable people, both sides of the fence here. This is targeted at those guys, not at conscientious owners or diligent agencies that want to do a good job. Nothing in this is scary for me because it's all pretty obvious stuff and we should be doing it anyway. So this is not targeted at us, it's targeted at getting the overall standard up to a level where renting in New Zealand is much, much better for everyone. So that's the big, big change to the jurisdiction of the tribunal. Last one I want to tackle tonight is the rent increases. So this came into royal assent in August 2020, so already in place. Basically what they're saying is the rent can't be increased now unless it's every 12 months. It was 180 days, it's now 12 months. What they're also saying is if the last rent increase was within 12 months, then you can't increase it until it's at least 12 months older. So a bit of a change, and we'll catch a few things, few people out. So for example, you're buying an investment property and you look at the rent and you know it's under rented. And you think as soon as I take over ownership of that property, I'm doing a big rent increase because I know I can. Everything else comparable was rented for $100 more. But if you don't check when the last rent increase was, you could come unstuck because remember, tenancies are like a going concern. All terms and conditions transfer from the old owner to the new owner. So if you purchase a property that's just had a rent increase, well then tough. You've got to wait 12 months until that has passed until you can do a new rent increase. So just a little trap, add that one to the due diligence process when you're buying an investment property, but otherwise nothing too concerning here. If you're doing big increases, you need to be able to prove it. In the industry we call this a CMA, a comparable market analysis. If you're doing a big increase, look at what is comparable, what are they sitting at. If it was challenged under Section 25 of the Residential Tenancies Act, can you put your hand on your heart and say, absolutely fair and square guys, everything else in the area that was comparable was at that level. So that's rent increases, and that caps off the Residential Tenancy Act amendment component of the RTA Roadshow. That's a meaty one, a big topic, and time will tell. Guys, this is becoming very specialised. I'm not scared about anything that has come out in these amendments, and like I said earlier, I think these are quite well rounded. It needs someone that knows what they're doing. If you know what you're doing, you've got nothing to be concerned about. But this is about generation rent. This is about people creating homes and properties for long periods. So that's the way New Zealand is heading. That's generation rent. So nothing to be scared of. If you need anything, any advice, just come and talk to us. We are happy to help anytime. So thank you for listening, and on to the next section soon.